So we're on this journey learning to draw the figure, and along the way you'll probably have these pivotal, memorable moments. Maybe it's a drawing. Like for me, I had this drawing and I was like, I remember this so vividly because I was like, I think I'm actually getting somewhere with this drawing. Another such pivotal, memorable moment was this one because it went so badly. So what happened was I decided to do this exercise where you remember what the person is doing, but then you hide the reference and try to draw the pose from memory or from imagination. And I thought I'd be all right at this. I was drawing figures, you know, all right at this point. But when I did this exercise, I was shocked at how little I could draw, how little I actually understood about how the figure was put together. Basically, at this point, I was copying references, but I didn't have an understanding of what I was looking at so that I could reconstruct it from my head. And I realized that if I could figure out the construction of the body, a little bit of anatomy, then I'd be able to hold all of these forms in my mind. I'd be able to rotate them as I wished. I could take liberties with a pose. I could change it or exaggerate it. I could adjust it so that the design was what I wanted it to be. So that even if I'm drawing from observation, from life or from photos, you know, this skill would really enhance what I could do because I could also conjure things up from my own imagination. So this is going to be such a powerful thing, such a powerful exercise. It was for me, and I think it will be for you too. So I'm going to give you really specific steps for drawing figures from imagination. But just so you know, there's a few different ways to approach this exercise. So one is the memory drawing exercise, where you might draw the pose from reference, but then hide the reference and hide your drawing and draw it again from your memory and see if you can reconjure up, is that a word, or the pose from your head. Another one is to have a pose in front of you, but draw a different pose, draw the same model doing a different pose. Or maybe just exaggerate quite strongly the pose that they're doing. So if they're bending to one side, you really bend them to one side and see if you can adjust it using the information that's in your head as well as the reference. And then there's just drawing straight up out of your head with no reference in front of you at all. So now let's talk about how to draw figures straight out of your head. All right, what you can see on the screen is a box. It doesn't look like a box, it just looks like a square, but that's because we're looking straight at the front of it, right? So you're looking straight at the front plane of the box. Now what we could do with that box is all sorts of things. One thing we could do is change the angle of it. Just angle this way or angle that way. Another thing we could do is rotate it so that we see a little bit of the side plane. So we can rotate it around as well. Another thing that we could do is tilt it forward or tilt it back. So we see the front top plane or the bottom plane. And another thing we could do is just shift it to the left or shift it to the right. And we could do all of those things at once. So we could, you know, change the angle of it, tilt it forward, shift it to the left. There's lots of different ways that you can combine these things to adjust any form. So how does that apply to figures? Well, if we think about figures in terms of three simple forms, a kind of pointed egg shape in the head, an egg-shaped rib cage, and then a kind of underpants-shaped pelvis area. If you want to learn more about these simple forms, we have a few tutorials about it, which I'll link below. But this is a way that we can break down the three major forms of any pose, and then we can start to vary these forms in those different ways. So one thing that we could do is we could just change how they're rotated. We could rotate the head one way, the pelvis another way, keep the rib cage the same, and now we have a pose with a big twist going up it. So that's really nice and interesting. But then we could make it even more interesting by tilting the head down, shift the pelvis across to the side, you know, tilt it forwards a bit more. And suddenly we have these three forms relating to each other in a really fun and interesting way. And so then you would need to, you know, start to build a pose onto that. But the three fundamental building blocks are what we're really interested in first and foremost. So let's look at another example. So let's say we have our three simple building blocks arranged like this. Well, then we could build a pose onto it. Maybe something like that. What's interesting is you could take the same configuration, the same configuration of the 3 building blocks, and then you could build a completely different pose onto it. So now I'm going to try and do a drawing from imagination using these simple ideas, these 3 fundamental building blocks. So let's see how this goes. So I'm just using a blending stump because I want to put this down lightly, because I know that I'm probably going to get it wrong on the first try. And one thing that I've noticed with drawing from imagination is there's a lot more trial and error with it. So I do have to go really light initially, and I always make mistakes that need correcting. So here I've put down those 3 building blocks. You can see the head is looking down, the rib cage and pelvis are angled differently, and that makes a nice squash and stretch in the torso. And I really wanted to have a strong squash and stretch in the torso because that is most of the time one of the most interesting things in a pose. One thing that I've probably got wrong here is the head is too vertically aligned over the rib cage. So it's not very dynamic, and also if the person's turning, if you turn your head to the side, the head just naturally shifts to that side, but I've got it like kind of too much over the rib cage. And so I'm going to need to move that across. So it's one of the very many mistakes that I mentioned earlier. I've put the thigh up. Now, when it comes to adding and attaching the thighs, this is one of the great benefits of using that simple pants shape for the pelvis pants, is because you can just build a cylindrical form for the thighs out of the sort of opening that the pants create for you. And so that's why it's a little bit easier to start with that pants shape. And because one leg is raised, that means the person is balancing on one leg. And so I need to make sure that leg comes in at an angle underneath their weight, because otherwise they won't be balanced. I've got a whole video about balance if you want to check it out, and I'll link it below. So here I'm fixing that head, shifting it off more to the side, and things are already starting to look more natural. But another mistake I've made is that foreshortened thigh, because the thigh that's raised is coming towards us a bit, is too long. Now this happens very often where something that's foreshortened will draw it too long as if it's not foreshortened. And so I'm going to have to just notice that and correct it hopefully as we go. Now I initially had both arms up, but then I decided to put one down. Very often it's fun and quite natural in a pose to have an action and a counter action. So if you have someone like reaching forward with one arm and this shoulder comes forward, it's then nice to bring the other shoulder back. Or if you're reaching up and you bring one shoulder up, it's nice to drop the other shoulder. And so, you know, this is the same in not just the shoulders, but all over the figure. And because I've got one arm raised, it's kind of nice to drop the other arm and drop that shoulder as well. Okay, so at this point, I'm kind of happy with the pose that I have, and I decide to create a light source. So usually I would recommend choosing one single direct light source that's gonna create really big, simple shadow shapes. And then what you can do is you can think, which planes are gonna face that light source and which planes are not gonna face the light source. And then you can start to create shapes of shadow based on what's facing the light source and what isn't. Now, as you get into this process, you're probably gonna come up with lots of things that you just go, I don't know. I don't know what's facing the light. I don't know how to draw the rib cage or how big to make it. I don't know how to draw the midsection to squash and stretch between the rib cage and the pelvis. All kinds of stuff like that. This is good. I know it feels frustrating and it's like, I wish I knew this stuff, but it's very eye-opening and it gives you questions that you can then go and find answers to. And that's a really powerful way of learning, is to struggle with something, get a load of questions, go and find the answers. And I think our brains really work well when we learn in that format. All right. So now I'm really trying to firm up the drawing, but also bring out those shadow shapes that I wanted to bring out. I'm really emphasizing that squash and stretch, as you can see. So I really push the squash on the one side and try and simplify and stretch out the other side. When it comes to the shoulders, There's no getting around understanding the anatomy, right? So, you know, actually, when we looked at those three simple forms, the pelvis pants and the ribcage egg, that's a little bit of anatomy. It's not correct anatomy because the the pelvis doesn't look anything like the pelvis pants. And the skull doesn't really look just like a pointy egg. It's, you know, the reality is much more complicated. But they are basically based on anatomy, on an understanding of anatomy. When it comes to the shoulders, it's going to be the same. You're going to need to learn a little bit more about anatomy. And we have a tutorial about shoulders and about the shoulder structure that you can check out. And so if it turns out that as you're doing this, it's the shoulders that you don't really get, you can go and check that out. And there's lots of great resources out there on shoulders. So there, I've greatly reduced the length of the foreshortened thigh, so it looks a lot more natural. And then I've done this leg, which is bearing the weight way too long. So I'm going to have to fix that too. Tons of mistakes all the way, but you know, it's all part of the fun. All right. And then I'm going to add the hair. So something that's really cool about this is that you can adjust things like how is the hair flying up, or what exactly are the shapes of shadow that are being created. You can adjust them to suit your design, right? So suddenly you have all the power to make it just as you want it to be. Where the light is hitting and the shape of light that it's creating, the shape of shadow it's creating, the way that the hair is flying up, the way that it's balanced over one leg. Everything is within your control because it's straight out of your head, and you're not at all a slave to a reference because there is no reference. And this is one of the great things about this exercise, is it's empowering you to use your design choices to draw instead of just trying to copy what you're seeing. The later stages are just kind of messing about with it, trying to adjust edges, maybe reduce the strength of edges where I don't really want that much attention, reduce the contrast, and then bring up the edges and bring up the contrast where I do want attention, taking photos of it with my phone and flipping it and realizing, oh, that looks a bit weird, and adjusting it. So if you're just starting out with figure drawing, I wouldn't worry about this exercise. I'd focus on looking at actual people from photos or in real life and trying to figure out where those three major simple forms are, the head, ribcage, and pelvis. Our Fresh Eyes mini course is free, and it's a fantastic way to learn how to do that. I'll link it below. When you start to do this exercise, in the beginning, it's not going to be about producing beautifully designed drawings. It's going to be about finding your weak points. You're going to be like, I have no idea what the armpit looks like when the arm is raised. You're going to wonder, what do the obliques look like when a person is twisting? You know, I can draw it when I see it in front of me, but I don't actually know what happens there. You go and you study that, and now you have it, and then you can draw it from imagination. Once you've filled a lot of those gaps, you'll notice that your drawings from imagination start to really become better and better, and that is when you can start to aim to have really nicely designed poses and shadow shapes and stuff like that. This is such a fun exercise. I've been neglecting doing this. I've just got this habit of just bring up some references and draw them and draw them and draw them. Because we've done a whole month on this in our study group, and I'm doing this so much now. It's so fun, and it's so powerful and effective. Even if you just want to draw from reference, your ability to draw things from imagination is really gonna accelerate your drawings from reference too. So I have some resources for you. I mentioned that Fresh Eyes mini course. If you need to sharpen up your skill in seeing those three simple forms, it's incredibly well designed, even though I do say so myself, to help you learn how to do that. If you need to learn about shoulders, we have a tutorial about that below as well. And we also have a reference library and a really friendly community. You can create a free account to access those, and those are below. There should be 2 videos on the screen, one introducing that Fresh Eyes idea and one about shoulders. Check one of them out, and I'll see you over there.